Welcome back to my channel, guys. My name is Raggy, and today I am coming at you with a tier list in which I will be rating, in order of S rank through to D, all of the main antagonists from Final Fantasy. Now, I've just lied to you because it's actually not all of them, but it is most of the antagonists, that is to say the main villains, from most of the main series titles. There aren't going to be any spin-off villains here or anything contrived like that. I'm just going to be getting into like the main villain of the main series. So without further ado, just in order of how I see them, let's get on with it. Starting off, we have Ultima, and I have to put Ultima in a solid B. Ultima is a character who, over time, has acquired more fame since the release of her title, since the release of Final Fantasy VIII. But in Final Fantasy VIII, she was actually a really confusing character. Through the first leg of the game, we're led to believe that the sorceress Edea is the main villain, and then we're led to believe that it's actually Adele, and then we find out that it's actually this character who we literally don't get to see until the very end of the game in the final boss encounter. She's got her motive, and she's definitely the main villain of this game, but she was really confusing back then, and by the time you see her, you don't really know anything about her. She's an evil witch who wants to compress time. It's weird. It's very contrived. She's not bad, but they could have done a little more with her. This is Goldbaz from Final Fantasy IV, and he is probably in the same vein as Ultima for different reasons. He's an okay villain. He's clearly an antagonistic force to Final Fantasy IV's main hero, Cecil, but he doesn't do a lot to interest me. I think they don't do quite enough with him. For most of the game, he is literally just this big evil guy for the sake of being a big evil guy. There's a little more to him in the plot than first meets the eye, but the same can be said of any of these characters. We call that a standard, not a feature. Then we have Arden Zunia, I believe his name is, from Final Fantasy 15. And I'm going to put him up in the A section. He could potentially be an S, but we don't really get to see a lot of him in the game, all things considered. He's very confusing the way he interacts with Noctis from the very start of the game all the way to the end. And by the time you realize this guy is the main villain, it's more confusing than anything, because he has this air of being both friend and foe the whole time. But why? And you find that out as you go along as well. But his placement in the story, the fact that he just shows up when he has no reason for knowing where you are, but he just shows up and he interacts with you. It's weird. He's weird. I wish they had handled him a little better. That is to say, Final Fantasy 15 as a game entirely could have handled its pacing a little better as well. But we can get into that in a different video, if you want. Comment down below if you want me to do a video about the problems with Final Fantasy 15. Then we have the Cloud of Darkness, I believe. Is it the Cloud of Darkness or the Cloud of Darkness? I don't know. From Final Fantasy 3, this is the main antag of that game. And again, I'm going to put her in B for pretty much exactly the same reason as Ultima. She is the main villain. She is the driving force for all of the bad stuff that's happening in that game. But you don't get to see a lot of her. And I think the first time they name drop her is quite late in the story. They could have replaced her with literally any character, essentially, and the game could have continued on. The Final Fantasy III probably had the first plot in the Final Fantasy series, at least compared to, say, in 1 and 2. 2 had a kind of a plot, but it was very... Final Fantasy II's plot felt like you were kind of operating outside of the plot. It is hard to explain. But yeah, Cloud of Darkness, solid B rating, I guess. Kefka. I know that Kefka is a lot of people's favorite villain. He is from Final Fantasy VI, and I'm going to put him in B as well. This could just be because I haven't really played through Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI is my least understood of the Final Fantasies, which is a shame because I know it's a lot of people's favorites. But my understanding of Kefka is that he is literally just an insane clown who harnesses the power of God or something. Similar to Cloud of Darkness, he could just be swapped out for any character. For what he does in the game, for what he contributes to progressing the plot, it could be achieved with any number of characters. But I don't know that, so that's another reason he's going into the B rating, because I don't know enough really to be fair. Then we have the Emperor from Final Fantasy II. And the Emperor, I'm going to put him down in C. Similar to a lot of these characters, he could have just been swapped out with any number of characters. Does he have a personal grief with the main characters of the game? Not really, because Final Fantasy II's plot revolves around war, and he's just the emperor of the opposing kingdom. Does he do some really unethical stuff? Well, yeah, but he's not that interesting, because he's just insert ruler of enemy kingdom. It's not interesting to me, I'm sorry. Sephiroth. Sephiroth can go into the A section. I know that Sephiroth has a lot of fanboys. He's a lot of people's favorite Final Fantasy character, and I can understand why. Because he's got a very interesting backstory. He's not necessarily evil, but he's kind of evil. He's interesting, I'll say that. Does he interest me personally? Not so much. I very much enjoyed Final Fantasy VII. I very much enjoyed conquering him at the end of the game. And seeing him come back in things like Advent Children and any other spin-off titles or whatever is also very interesting. So we appreciate Sephiroth. He's not our favorite, but we appreciate him very, very much. Then we have Gallant Disley, I believe his name is, from Final Fantasy XIII. And I am going to put this guy all the way down into D. I'm sorry if you like this character, but I don't think you like this character. I don't think anyone really knows much about him. But I know that for the first most of Final Fantasy XIII, you don't even know this guy exists. And Final Fantasy XIII's plot and story and everything is so contrived and hard to understand, at least on your first playthrough, that as a main antagonist, compared to the likes of Kefka or Sephiroth or Goldbaz even, he could, this is a problem with a lot of the villains I'm starting to realize, is he could just be swapped out with anyone. He's not interesting to me. He doesn't add a lot. He could have been swapped with anyone. So we don't really care for Gallant. I'm sorry. Next on this list, I'm going to put Xdeath up into the A section. Xdeath is far from my favorite, which is weird to say because I just ranked him in A. But I really, really like that he's not so much a character, but he's more the personification of a concept. Xdeath is the personification of void or nothingness. He's not evil. He's not good. It's his one driving desire, need, compulsion is to bring all that exists to nothing. He just wants non-existence to be the norm. So he's not even doing things to be a dick. He's just compelled to bring everything to destruction. And that's really frightening. He doesn't have a personal beef with the protags or anything like that, but he doesn't need it. Having an antagonist like Xdeath is about conquering your feelings about the void, rather than actually conquering some adverse opinion held by an individual. So I really like that. I wish there were more villains like this. Next on the list, I have to put Kuja from Final Fantasy IX up into S rank. If only because Final Fantasy IX is my favorite from the Final Fantasy series. Kuja for me is one of the most interesting characters. I don't want to give too much away if you haven't played the game, but Kuja, he has a lot to him. He's a synthetically made genome. He's not a real person. He was granted what he thought was immortality, finds out he's not. The main theme of Final Fantasy IX is life and death, and this character gives so much to that because he's driven insane, essentially, by his need to prove his immortality against all odds, where there is, in fact, no immortality. He thinks he's all-powerful and finds out that he's not. And he literally goes through the stages of grief while coming to terms with that, which parallels what the heroes are doing in other situations. All of the characters are going through the stages of grief over one thing or another. And Kuja parallels that. And that's something that we don't really see very often, is when the villain can relate to the hero. And he actually has a proper relationship with the protag as well. He's actually important. You couldn't just swap Kuja with any character. So that's something he's definitely got going over a lot of the characters on this tier list today. Next on this list is Seymour from Final Fantasy X. And this, I believe, is going to be a rather unpopular choice. I'm actually going to put him up in S rank with Kuja. Seymour, I understand, is a pretty widely unliked Antag, and not for the right reasons. He does some pretty terrible things, but he's often criticized as being uninteresting or boring or contrived. But I think because he has such a rapport with the protagonists, he has this building relationship, and you learn more about him as you get through the plot. He's complicated. Unlike a lot of the villains on this list today, Seymour is a really complex character, and by learning more about him, you kind of learn to sympathize with him just a little bit. You can't forgive him for the bad things that he does in the game, but you understand why. He's a very complex character, and I wish that we could see more of him. Next on this list, we have the original antagonist from the Final Fantasy series, and that is Garland from Final Fantasy I. Garland, I'm going to put in B section, just because as a stock standard villain, he serves his purpose quite well. You only see him like twice in the entire game. That's at the very start, and then again at the very end. His game revolves around him being involved in a time paradox loop. And if this, again, he qualifies as a character who could have actually potentially been swapped out for anything. But for the way he looks and the way he's included in this time loop paradox, it's very cool and unique. I like him a lot. Lastly on this list, we have from Final Fantasy XII, Vayne Solidor. Vayne is kind of a dick, but I'm going to have to put him all the way down in C, which is weird because I actually kind of really liked him, but he's disappointing. He was framed as like the main antag of this game, but he doesn't do a lot. Similar to the Emperor, he's just the leader of the opposing kingdom. There's a little more intrigue, there's a little more treachery in Final Fantasy XII than I would say there is in Final Fantasy II, but Vayne serves the exact same role as the Emperor. He could have been anyone. They could have actually made the main villain in Final Fantasy XII Gallant, who would then take over from Vayne. He might incite a coup or something, but instead they gave him a redemption story, which that's fine. But strictly speaking, even Cid from Final Fantasy XII was actually what I would consider to be a much better, more interesting villain than Vayne. Vayne served a good role for what the game needed, but he wasn't terribly interesting, so there you go. Anyways, that completes my list for rating Final Fantasy villains in terms of S rank through to D. Please leave in the comments who your favorites are, and if you agree with any of mine, what are your reasons? If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can get instant updates anytime there is a new upload, and then you don't have to miss out ever again. In any case, my name is Raggy. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.